I want to discuss with you how we can avoid a climate catastrophe. Let me share my screen and let's see, we have it over here. And I want to see about the view. Show presenter notes. Okay, slide only. Now the play button. Okay, sorry. Okay, so can a climate catastrophe be prevented? This is probably the most important question of today. And I want to get into it. And just a little bit about myself to start. I'm Professor Emeritus of Mathematics, College of Staten Island, and President Emeritus of Jewish Veg, and that was formerly Jewish Vegetarians of North America when I was president there for many years. Actually, there's a connection here from my being professor and being president, because I was teaching a course in math at the College of Staten Island. And one of the courses I was teaching was for liberal arts, non-science students. They were interested in music, arts, things like that, not math at all, poorly motivated. So I came up with the idea of creating a course called Mathematics and the Environment, a unique course at the time. And there was no textbook, so I wrote this book, Mathematics and Global Survival. This is actually the fourth edition of the book. And we tried to tie the math course into events that were happening at the time in the world. And one year it was World Hunger. And I found out that at that time, 20 million people were dying of hunger and its effects. About 10% or more of the world's people being chronically undernourished. I thought, well, just can't get enough food. Unfortunate. Then I read this wonderful book by Francis Moorhead called Diet for a Small Planet, and pointed out that the wastefulness of animal-based diets, that, for example, about 70% of grain produced in the US, maybe 40% of the grain produced worldwide, fed to animals to fatten them up for slaughter. And after discussing this to the students a number of times, I slowly but surely moved into becoming a vegetarian in 1978, then a vegan in about the year 2000. And since then, I've been really promoting it. And one of the things when I give a talk, introduce a little bit of humor. I have this tie here with all kinds of fruits on it, another one with all kinds of vegetables, and a kippah, skull cap here, more fruits. And I kid people a bit and say, most important, I'm wearing Fruit of the Loom underwear. Okay. And after that, becoming a vegetarian, trying to get the message out and realizing it's important for global survival. I have this book here, Judaism and Global Survival. I'm hoping in the summer of 2023 to have a 20th anniversary edition of that book coming out. And most recently, The Vegan Revolution, Saving Our World, Vitalizing Judaism, to the things I'm really trying to get into. And now we want to get into the issue of climate change. First, we're going to discuss how significant the threat is, and then discuss the possibility of averting a climate catastrophe. Notice before going back here, global survival, Judaism, saving our world. So you can see this is an issue I've been working on for many, many years. Okay, so the very important thing here, it's not just me. I'm not a climate expert, but look at the strong consensus. Polls show 97% of climate scientists, all the major scientific academies worldwide have taken position, and pretty much all of them have. And perhaps most important, peer-reviewed articles, respected scientific journals, thousands of them, all saying climate change is happening, it's a serious threat, and human activities are a major factor. Of course, of the many warnings, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has called the situation for climate change a code red for humanity, and has indicated that delay means death. So meaning we have very little time to make a difference. And related to that, the most important group on climate change, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they shared the Nobel Prize for Peace in 2005 with Al Gore for his movie, An Inconvenient Truth. And they, every 5 years or so, they come out with a report on climate change. And because it's an intergovernmental panel, they have experts from all over the world, climate experts. So it's very significant, consensus document. And they come out every 5 years with increasingly dire warnings about the threats and increasing certainty that climate change is a threat. Anyway, in 2018, they indicated that we may have only until 2030 to make unprecedented changes, positive changes to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, atmospheric carbon dioxide, in order to have a chance to avert a climate catastrophe by in the future. Okay. Why isn't it going? Oh, okay, sorry. Well, unfortunately, they say we have a little time, but notice 2018, they issued the warning on 2022 that carbon dioxide, instead of going down in the atmosphere, have been increasing. Okay, here is a very important graph indicating temperature has been rising very sharply. This horizontal line here, the average temperature for the 20th century. So some below, some above. First half of the century below that average, but notice temperature increasing very sharply here in recent years. And of course, that heat waves are increasing. And to give an example of some of the things happening, very important, every decade since the 1970s has been hotter than the previous decade. So there's a trend here. This is very significant. 23 years in this century, every one of them is in the top 24 hottest years. Since temperature records were kept in that worldwide in about 1880. 2020 tied 26 for the hottest year on record. The hottest month ever was in 2021 in July. And many temperature records broken in 2022. For example, London, for the first time, had 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, unfortunately, with all those changes, we ain't seen nothing yet, as the expression goes. We are now here at about 1.2 degrees Celsius in 2023 as we speak. And the experts hope it won't exceed 1.5, because beyond that, they say it could be even more serious climate effects. But as it indicates here, that's expected to happen maybe in the 2030s, well before the middle of the century. And if you look to the end of the century, as a minimum, depending on the circumstances, depending on the policies, what's carried out, but they expect a minimum of about 3 degrees Celsius, could be 4, 5, or 6. So this indicates the tremendous seriousness of the climate threats. Okay, and things are happening. Glaciers are melting all over the world. Polar ice caps are melting. And especially important, Greenland, such a big area, snow and ice. And here's some melting here, but as time goes on, it's expected to be far more. That could cause major increase in sea levels. And that, of course, is threatening polar bears who depend on the ice in the Arctic. And I think we have another picture of that, symbolic picture here, polar bears in danger. Actually, this is part of what the experts call the sixth extinction. And it's not just the polar bear, but species of plants and animals all over the world are threatened, especially in areas like the rainforest in Brazil that are being destroyed very rapidly. And they feel more than half of the plant species and animal species in the world reside in those tropical rainforests. Okay, so because of the melting, seas are rising, and there's already sunny day flooding in coastal cities. Sunny day, no rain, but the high tides are causing the flooding to coastal cities like Miami, Florida. It's been only about 8 inches so far, but expect to rise much, much more in the future. Could be very dangerous for coastal cities. And here's an example in Israel, where I am now. Large parts of its coastline could be lost by 2050 because of the rapid rise in sea levels. Okay, it's not just the polar ice caps melting, glaciers melting, Greenland melting, but permafrost. As the name indicates here, it's supposed to be permanent frost, but that's melting, and that's very, very serious. What's underneath that permafrost, there's methane, a very potent greenhouse gas, and other greenhouse gases. So that makes future climate change, again, much more of a threat. Okay, so in addition, with the higher temperature, droughts are increasing, many rivers and lakes and streams are drying up, wildfires are increasing. The former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, indicated that the wildfire season there used to be a few months a year. Now it's becoming almost the entire year. Very serious problem. And the storms are increasing in severity. And some people may say, well, we always had storms, we had climate events, but they're becoming more severe. And there's three major reasons. One, as we indicated before, the seas are higher. That means more of a storm surge than the water moving further inland. The water is hotter, and that gives more energy to the storms, so that you can have a tropical storm approaching landfall, and by the time it gets to landfall, that could be a serious hurricane. And there's more moisture as the warm the atmosphere is hotter, and therefore can absorb more water. So when the rain does come, could be far heavier, last far longer. And probably because that floods are increasing, you can see the difficulties here, and many examples. Sometimes it seems almost every week there's another indication. Not too long ago, Pakistan, for example, 1/3 of the country was flooded. Well, you might think you can't get even more pessimistic, but there's 4 reasons why things are likely to get far worse. And instead of going through the words here, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. So I'm going to be showing that we just saw this one. So one of the reasons it can get far worse, we indicated before, is the much higher temperatures that are projected. We're way down here at 1.2 degrees Celsius, 2.2 degrees Fahrenheit. It could be far, far higher. And that would have all the effects we showed before, the droughts, the wildfires, the floods, the storms. Now, this is a very, very significant curve for an understanding of why climate change is such a threat. This is atmospheric carbon dioxide on the vertical axis, was the years over here. And if this started way back for the Industrial Revolution, the atmospheric carbon dioxide was 285 parts per million. You can see it's been going up, 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 up. And these little lines here, by the way, are just because, depending on the type of the year, could be a little higher, a little bit lower. So it's now very dangerous, 420 parts per million. And why that is dangerous is the experts think that 350 is a threshold for climate stability, just like there's a threshold for cholesterol. The doctors think above that, the person is more likely to have a heart attack. So the world is like a patient with very high cholesterol. 350 threshold, way up here, making matters worse. It's increasing by 2 or 3 parts per million per year. And what really has to happen is somehow, we're going to see how that might happen later, it has to get way back down here to that 350 parts per million level. So very difficult to do, but the experts are talking about moving to renewable energies, etc. But we'll get into that a bit later. Okay, the third reason why things are likely to get worse is that because of the effects of climate change, the floods, the storms, the heat waves, droughts, they expect tens of millions, some say as many as 1 billion, of desperate refugees fleeing the effects of climate change. And here you can see some examples of that. And the fourth reason is shown here a bit, and that is that there's the possibility of what's called self-reinforcing positive feedback loops, vicious cycles that can make things far worse. Probably all familiar with the so-called domino effect, where you can have a million dominoes lined up one behind the other, and just a small light tap on the first one will set off the second, third, fourth, all of a million. So here it's a little different kind of situation, but it's something also where a trend, once it starts, cannot be stopped. So here is an example. One quick example for this is, as things get hotter, of course, people are going to use more air conditioning. That means more fossil fuel burns, more greenhouse emissions, heating up, and therefore more air conditioning. So you can see the cycle. Here, it's something like this, that there are three reasons that climate change will increase in the future, making future fires more likely, and that gives you a cycle. Number one, you see here, the fire, these destroyed trees had carbon that's all emitted into the atmosphere. The more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, greenhouse gases, more heating, and so these burnt trees no longer sequester carbon dioxide. That was a sink, that's disappeared. The burnt trees emit that carbon dioxide, and of course, because of the fire, many homes are destroyed, many cars are destroyed, much energy will be needed, required to rebuild the homes, to produce new cars. So all of these make future fires and future other climate effects more severe. Another example of this vicious cycle of positive feedback loop is up north, the snow and ice is a very good reflector. Sun's rays hit it, and 90% of the sunlight's reflected back out into space. However, eventually some of this ice is going to melt, and the much darker water or soil is far less of a good reflector. So here, instead of 90% being reflected, only about 6%. So much more remains to heat things up. And again, that can cause a positive feedback loop, a vicious cycle. And there's just one report, again, of the unprecedented extreme weather caused by all the factors we mentioned before in the Middle East, and that's true all over the world. So we have discussed how serious the threats are. Now we want to discuss what can be done, what is being done to avert a climate catastrophe. One important thing, and the experts keep saying, we have to reduce the carbon footprint. We have to shift from fossil fuels, oil and coal, gas, for example, to renewable, and for solar energy, very important. Thankfully, that's been increasing such that the prices have decreased sharply, and it's becoming very competitive with other forms of energy. And wind power also use more and more, and reduce greenhouse green emissions. Prices have gone down, much more competitive. So this is part of the answer, but it's ignoring, as they say, the elephant in the room, and more significantly, more relevantly, the cow in the room. And I got to notice a lot from this book by Glenn Mercer, Food is Climate, pointing out that climate change is the most significant contributor to, animal-based agriculture, the most important contributor to climate change. And the reason is over 40% of the world's ice-free land used for grazing and growing feed crops for animals. So because of that, according to that book, used to be 6 trillion trees. Now thousands of years ago, now it's down to 3,000 trees. And here are just some examples. Trees cut down, again, create grazing land for animals, and land to grow feed crops for animals, forests being burned down, and it's the older trees being destroyed. So trees are being replanted, but saplings, and it takes a long time for them to grow and be as effective as the older trees, but certainly has to be started, and we have to stop burning down forests, cutting down trees. Okay, so to reinforce that, 3/4, like closer to 70% actually, shown here. Only about a little more than a quarter, 30% is for cauliflower, carrots, other vegetables. About 70% is for animal-based agriculture, grazing and producing feed crops. And if that, not all, but much of that could be reforested, that would sequester or absorb much of the atmospheric carbon dioxide, which we said is at such a high level behind the safe threshold, and that gives a chance to avert a climate catastrophe. Unfortunately, it's just the opposite has been happening, and this report, I think, was in August of 2022, deforestation, 12-year high. Well, thankfully, this leader is no longer there. Hopefully, that will be positive. But trees are still being destroyed at a rapid rate. Unfortunately, there are projections that meat production may keep increasing sharply, may even double by the mid-century, means many more trees being cut down, forests being burned down. So we are, in effect, committing slow suicide, leading ourselves to extinction in this world. Okay, here is Sawish Rao. He's a systems engineer, and he wrote this paper, which we're going to show in the next slide. I believe he said 87% of the greenhouse gas, should say effect here, is due to animal agriculture. He takes the worst cost opportunity into account. Okay, opportunity cost lost by not reforesting. So it's not just that methane emitted from cows, which, by the way, is a very potent greenhouse gas, over 80 times as potent as carbon dioxide in the 10 to 15 years it's in the atmosphere. So if we can eliminate the animal agriculture, then in 10 to 15 years, there'll be far, far less methane, and that could really be a super effect, because carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere for hundreds of years, sometimes over 1,000 years. So cutting carbon dioxide emissions now, very positive, but it wouldn't make a super difference because so much would remain in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. Promised his granddaughter he would help create a vegan world by 2026. We can only hope it will be happening. Okay. So thankfully, people are protesting, climate change demonstration, and the young people especially getting involved. So the big question, what kind of world are we leaving for future generations with all the potential for far more heating, far more negative effects? So I've been blessed, being in Israel for over 60 years, having 4 grandchildren getting married. Here are 5 of the 6 great-grandchildren. Here are 2 granddaughters. Here are 2 granddaughters-in-law. So what kind of world are we leaving? You see, I have a stake in this. So the bottom line, we have a choice between a mainly vegan world and a destroyed world. And I always say, give peas a chance in order to help make that vegan world. So it's important that to be success in averting a climate catastrophe, it's essential. There's no planet B, there's no effective plan B other than stopping the animal-based agriculture, stopping the destruction of trees, destruction of forests, especially the rainforest, and replanting trees to sequester much of the very high atmospheric carbon dioxide. We can get down to a safe level. So again, since veganism is so important, I want to go into why, many reasons for it, in addition to the climate change. So here, preserving our health, feeding animals with compassion, these are reasons for veganism. In addition to protecting the environment, part of that, of course, reducing the threat from climate change, conserving natural resources, reducing hunger, pursuing peace. All of these are greatly helped through a vegan diet, as we're going to try to show in the next slides. And before getting into that, I want to show how I've been trying to really be involved, get the message out. Here is my cover story in a Jerusalem Report titled "Should Jews Be Vegans?" Made a very strong case that veganism is very important, consistent with basic Jewish values, and nobody really has, I don't think, effectively contacted these arguments that I'm going to be presenting here. Okay, so I'm going to go into Jewish teachings on health, and by the way, every religion is based on compassion and justice, loving others, being kind to strangers, etc. So I'm focusing on Jewish teaching. So it's universal message. It's relevant to every other religion and people who just are interested in social justice, humanistic values. So the basic teaching here, in some ways, this could be the most important mitzvah. And this Martin be old enough, so take him to jokingly regard our souls. The sages interpreted to jokingly regard our health. The word ma'od here means very. And there's 613 mitzvot, but I think this is the only one that has that word ma'od in it. So it's super important to taking care of our health. Another important indication, Jewish teaching, pikuach nefesh, Jewish mandate to do everything possible to save a human life. So important that it overrides 610 of the 613 mitzvot or commandments. And the only three it doesn't override are the three prohibitions for the cardinal sins, the prohibitions against murder, sexual immorality, and idolatry. Okay, so research, many peer-reviewed articles in respected science journals indicate that vegan diet, whole foods, preferably plant-based diet, can promote weight loss, reduce your risk of heart disease, and manage diabetes. And as we're going to see, it not only reduces the risk of heart disease, but it also can reverse it. Okay, so here's a bottom line graph here. San Francisco, typical American city, very high meat consumption, and going along with it, very high amounts of heart disease, high amounts of bowel cancer. In contrast, Guatemala, a very poor country, very little. Look at the difference in meat consumption, very much less meat consumption and far less heart disease, far less bowel cancer. So this by itself summarizes the case in terms of health. Okay, so we mentioned heart disease can actually be reversed. It's a Dr. Dean Ornish cover story in Newsweek, Can This Man Save Your Heart? And it's indicated he did a study. He wanted to show that heart disease could be reversed with not only drugs or surgery, but on a very low fat, pretty much a vegan diet. And he had great success, so much so that initially insurance companies were not insuring it for that procedure, providing insurance benefits. Later on, many of them are, because they saw that it was much lower in cost and it's also much longer lasting. So heart disease can be reversed in many cases. Many severe cases were reversed on his very low-fat, pretty much vegan diet and other positive life changes. Okay, not only heart disease, but really type 2 diabetes. Neil Barnard founded the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, and he has a book here about reversing diabetes. And Unfortunately, most doctors are not telling their patients about this. They're trained in telling people what pill to use, and if that causes a side effect, here's another pill. But this should all be mentioned. And another very important study, the China study, T. Cohen Campbell, it indicated that the more animal protein in the diet, the more disease. This China study that was called a Grand Prix of Epidemiology by the New York Times, and they said it's the most comprehensive study of nutrition ever conducted. And it could only be done in China in a way because, unlike in most countries, Chinese people tend to stay in one village generation to generation, and the diets differ from village to village. And he found in the villages where it was lower meat consumption, less disease. Very important study. Again, these studies, like Dean Ornish in Reversing Heart Disease, this China study, and here's another example, wartime study. This should be the basis of medicine today, but very often it's based on animal experimentation. It often gives misleading results with animals are so different from people. And inducing a disease in an animal is not the same as people getting it naturally. Anyway, many studies. Wartime, 1940s to 45, World War II, wartime conditions, Norway, meat consumption went down pretty sharply. And even though it was a time of great stress, the death rate went down sharply as well. War ended, people went back toward a meat-based diet. And here again, it was reduced sharply. Meat consumption increases, and the death rates go back up again. Okay, now heart disease, more cholesterol, and more heart disease. 3 graphs showing that. And this is the number 1 killer, heart disease. So since cholesterol is such a major factor, what are the foods that have the most cholesterol? So here's a very important thing, plant foods, all zeros. I used to tell my students, here's your homework assignment, you must memorize all the numbers. But whether it be grains, vegetables, nuts, seeds, fruit, legumes, or even vegetable oils, no cholesterol at all. However, every animal product, especially eggs, the highest, very high, the most concentrated form of cholesterol. So that can make a big difference. The body makes its own cholesterol enough, so we don't need the extra, which is causing the epidemic of heart disease. So why is this happening? Why is the plant-based diet so much better than the animal-based diet? Partly because we are much closer to herbivorous animals, really beautiful teeth, great for grinding of food, certainly far from the hard, long, dagger-like teeth of a carnivorous animal, or even an omnivorous animal like a bear, designed to really rip apart flesh of another animal, not only the teeth, but with the hand, perfect for picking an apple or an orange from a tree, or a potato or a carrot from the ground. Again, far from the claws here that carnivorous or omnivorous animal has to tear apart an animal. Another big difference, not just the teeth, not just the hands, but we have a much longer intestinal system for a herbivorous animal like a deer than a carnivorous animal. It's actually 4 times longer per unit height. And this is very good for fruits and vegetables, plant foods, because it gives plenty of time for that to be in the system and for the nutrients, the vitamins and minerals to be absorbed by the body. In addition, the stomach acids of a carnivorous animal is about 20 times stronger than that of a herbivorous animal. And that strong acid enables the digestion of meat. For the animal, we don't have that. So many digestive problems for humans on an animal-based diet. So you can see the big differences here. So, animal-based diets are natural for people. It's actually changed the human being. For example, the age of puberty in young girls all over the world has become lower. Again, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So here's a graph. And take example of Norway. It used to be the age of puberty, the first period for young ladies, over 70. Notice going down, 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 and down to about 30, 13, sorry. And this trend has continued more and more. And this is only taking us about 2000. So the bottom line for the developed countries, at least, it's mainly on a animal-based diet. The age of puberty used to be in the 16 to 17 year range. Now it's in the 12 to 13 year. And that's an average. So the girls as young as 10 getting their first period, they're certainly not emotionally prepared to have a baby, but because of this very unnatural diet, animal-based diet, that is a possibility. Okay, we're going to get now, continuing on health for a bit before we get to other reasons for veganism. There's two myths, a protein myth and a calcium myth. Some feel, well, you have to eat meat as animal products to get protein, but there's plenty of protein in nuts and seeds and other plant foods. Even a melon has 10% of its calories in protein. Spinach has 47% of its calories in protein. And here's an example of the protein in different species. And here it is for a human being. For human baby, that increases his or her birth rate, doubles it in 6 months, only about 5% of calories in protein, very small amount. And compared to a rat, where it's close to 50%, just under 50%, much of the experiments were done on rats, and that gives many misleading indications. And that's why the main question that vegetarians and vegans get is, how do you get enough protein? What's your source of protein? But the opposite question should be asked about the negative effects of protein on the diet. So I'm going to get into that a little bit more, but first a little bit about the so-called calcium myth. And we say it's a myth because you can get plenty of calcium from plants. And this is very important. The countries where they get the most dairy products, the most calcium, the US, Israel, Scandinavian countries, they have the highest rates of osteoporosis. So how can this be? And we ask the question, does animal protein cause osteoporosis? And we see it actually does, because the human body can absorb all the carbohydrates we take in, all the fat, but only a limited amount of protein. That excess protein is going to be excreted. But before that happens, the excess protein acidifies the blood. And in order to buffer and neutralize that, calcium is required. If there's not enough calcium in the blood, it's going to be taken from the bones and excreted along with that excess protein. So that means that a person can be taking in a lot of dairy products, a lot of calcium, and still have a negative calcium balance and be in danger of getting osteoporosis. And here's a graph that shows that. Try to get a better one. Let me try to explain this one. Here is the calcium emitted in the urine. And if the protein is in the diet is high, there's going to be a high amount of calcium excreted in the urine. If it's medium, then it's less. And if it's low, even less, only to go back in a high case. So if it's an animal-based diet, then much more calcium be excreted. And again, a person can have negative calcium balance. And again, that's the reason that countries that take the most dairy products, they're usually countries that also have a lot of meat, a lot of animal protein, and therefore high rates of osteoporosis. Okay, now here's an example of misleading discussions of protein. They call it a healthy eating plate. And they're right about fruits, they're right about vegetables, they're right about whole grains, but here they call it healthy protein, ignoring that grains, vegetables, and fruits all have protein as well. And this is really the unhealthy protein from meat and other animal products. Okay, so I want to get into some other negative health effects of the animal-based diets. And one is that future pandemics, more likely on animal-based diets, and of course, we've been suffering in recent years from the coronavirus, and there's some dispute about it, but a lot of experts think that it's the wet market here in China, where animals are killed right outside in very crowded, unsanitary conditions, that could be the cause. Many past pandemics caused by animal-based diets. Some examples are the bird flu, swine flu, MERS, SARS, Ebola, and actually AIDS, and probably we're still somewhat recovering from the coronavirus. And even now, bird flu has broken out again. Millions of birds had to be killed or destroyed, and not in the most humane way. Okay, before we move on, one other negative effect of animal-based diet, tremendous amount of antibiotics, more than half of those produced are fed to healthy animals. But to prevent diseases, because of that, antibiotic resistance is building up. Okay, because antibiotics are put into the animal feed, it increases their growth rate and also is used to try to prevent diseases under the very unnatural conditions that animals are raised. And so every time a person has a bite of fish or chicken, other animal products, they're getting a little bit of a dose of an antibiotic, and that could build up resistance in the bacteria in human bodies, and therefore the antibiotics could lose their effectiveness. It could be a very serious threat. Okay, so we've been talking about health now, Jewish teachings on compassion for animals, and again, other religions have similar teachings, but one of the Jews are to be Rahmanim, B'nai Rahmanim, compassionate children of compassionate ancestors, imitating a God whose compassion is over all of God's works. That's in the book of Psalms. Okay, in addition, the book of Proverbs says the righteous individual considers the lives of his or her animal. Okay, it's very strong Jewish teachings about compassion for animals and some specific examples based on the Torah, Jewish scriptures. We're not to muzzle an ox while he's threshing in the field so that he can enjoy the products of the field while working. We're not to yoke a strong animal with a weak one, because it'll be hard for the weak one to keep up, and it's not natural for the strong animal to have to slow down. And these are to feed animals, make sure the animal is fed before sitting down to their own meals. And Shabbat, the Jewish Sabbath, very important in Judaism. People are to rest on that day, but animals are to rest as well. And Jewish commentators indicate that means they should be free on the Sabbath day to roam in the fields, enjoy the beauties of God's creation, and that's what we're going to be seeing soon, that is far from the reality. And here it is. Instead of chickens being allowed to Shabbat and other times to have their natural instincts taken care of, the pecking order, etc., they're kept in cages so small. These are called battery cages, one on top of the other. The droppings from these will hit these and keep going down and down. It might be 5 or 6 rows like this. Notice how crowded it is, such that they can't even stretch one wing. Very unnatural conditions, natural instincts, as I said, thwarted, so they tend in their frustration to peck at each other, harming other birds, sometimes leading to their death. So the industry, instead of increasing the size although they've been forced to do so to a small extent, but still super crowded. And what did they do? They don't increase the size. They actually say, well, the beaks are hurting others. Let's cut off that beak to a certain extent so it won't be so sharp. Very painful, no painkiller, no anesthetic is being used. Birds are severely harmed. Sometimes it's so severe that results in them not being able to eat, and they die from that. But industry, even if they lose some chicks, they feel that economically it's better to have small cages and make more of a profit. So these are the females, the egg-laying hens, but the males, even worse, because actually they cannot lay eggs. They have not been genetically programmed as the so-called growers have, the meat-producing chick. So they are often ground up, indicated here, possibly used for pet food. Sometimes they're just thrown into a plastic bag where they die from suffocation or from being crushed by the birds that are thrown in after them. So very horrible conditions for chicks at the egg-laying hatcheries, etc. And let's see, I thought I had another one here. Okay, guess not. But here is an example. Dairy cows are artificially inseminated every single year on what the industry itself calls rape racks. And not a great picture, but this is it. So they'll constantly be able to give milk. And then, well, change the order this is meant to be before. This is an example of what the industry calls rape rack. And just as human beings love their children, like to play with them, the same thing with animals, but that doesn't happen. As I said, certainly the chicks don't have time to spend with their mothers. The same thing with the calves, the baby cows. They are taken away from the mother almost immediately so that the cow's milk can be sold rather than used what should be for the baby calves to raise them up, by the way, from 70 pounds to like 700 in a very short time. So the milk was not designed for people. It was designed to greatly increase the weight of baby cow. Matter of fact, human beings are the only species that drinks milk from another species and after a weaning period. Very unnatural, and it has the effect again of one of the causes of the decreasing age of puberty we mentioned before. In order to get the word out here, in the summer of 2022, I wrote this ebook, Restoring and Transferring the Ancient Jewish New Year for Animals. I'm calling it An Idea Whose Time Has Come because so it's important to get that out. And this ancient New Year initially was a tithing for animals for sacrifices. So we want to restore it, but very important to transform it into a day devoted to increasing awareness of Judaism's beautiful teachings on compassion for animals and how far the realities for animals on factory farms are. So this is another picture that the other one was sort of distorted to show the words better, but here are some of the animals you can see. An example, I think, from the Messianic period, which Jews yearn for and will be a period of harmony with the animals, consistent with Isaiah's powerful prophecy that in the ideal time to come, the Messianic period, the wolf will dwell with the lamb, the lion will restore the ox, no one shall hurt nor destroy in all of God's holy mountain. So we've talked, in addition to climate change, about health and compassion for animals, and we're going to move on. But here's an example just to go forward and trying to get that idea out about the ancient Jewish needs for animals. I had this website sponsored by Eitzim, Ecological Judaism, and they were kind enough to provide these beautiful pictures that go along with it. So I'm hoping more and more that will make a difference so people become aware of how terribly animals are treated, and that will be a big factor in hopefully moving many people toward vegan diets. Okay, so sort of pretty quickly, other Jewish teachings talked about health, compassion for animals, the environment, Jewish teachings on conservation of resources. Well, in the book of Deuteronomy, it says that even in warfare, uh, Jews are not to to cut down using an axe trees, fruit trees, to build a battering ram to overcome an enemy fortification. And the Jewish sages, and I think one of the most important things they did, they extended that very specific thing about not destroying trees in wartime, fruit trees, and made it a general prohibition for Bal Tashchit, you shall not waste unnecessarily or destroy anything of value. Very important teaching in a world where we produce and waste so much. But as in the other cases, the realities are far from that because the animal-based diet is very wasteful, the use of land, water, energy, other resources. And just to give one example, tremendous amount of water is needed to irrigate the feed crops for the animals. We indicated in the US about 70% of the grain being produced being fed to the animals. And especially in semi-arid areas like California, much water irrigation, so much so that it requires about 13 times as much water for a person on an animal-based diet than for a person on a vegan diet. So that's another reason conservation of resources, because the animal-based diets are so wasteful. And a fifth reason is that of hunger. So here are the Jewish teachings on the powerful prophecy of Isaiah, which, by the way, is the Torah, the prophetic portion read on Yom Kippur, the holiest Jewish year. So Isaiah talks about the true purpose of fasting, and he says it's share our bread with the hungry and depression. And another teaching is that the animals were to leave a corner of their field for the poor and the gleanings of their harvest. Picking a lot of corn and some corn falls to the ground, that was to be left for the poor. That was actually a great welfare kind of system in a way, that the poor were taken care of, but not given a check, but they had to actually go out in the field, pick the beans of the harvest and crops left in the corners of the field. But again, in every case, the powerful Jewish teachings, but there's a scandal of world hunger with about 9 million people dying of hunger effects every year, and over 10% of world's people being chronically malnourished. Well, here's the question: how would a vegan world help shift? How would it shift to a vegan world, reduce world hunger? And again, because more than enough food is produced, but instead of being fed directly to people, it's being fed to animals. And according to this study, we could feed 3.5 billion people beyond the 8 billion people that already exist in the world, many not. So we can feed all of them plus additional 3.5 billion people. Okay, one point before going on to the final one about peace is, again, we're feeding so much grain to the animals. What makes this even more scandalous, even more shameful, is we take healthy foods like soy and oats and corn, very high in fiber and complex carbohydrates, feed them to animals, and we get meat and other animal products with the opposite characteristics: very unhealthy, saturated fat and cholesterol, and completely devoid of fiber and complex carbohydrates. Okay, so now the last of the, I call the Jewish teachings, values, mandates that point to veganism as an ideal diet. Jewish teachings on peace, and it says in the Book of Psalms that unlike us on mitzvot, where we are carried out, we are seek peace, but pursue it. It's so important to go beyond where we are to pursue it. There's only one other teaching in Judaism where we are to pursue something, and that is tzedek tzedek terdov, justice, justice shalt thou pursue, peace and justice. And the Israelites often went to war, not always for defensive purposes, but there's a prophetic dream that nations shall build their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks, and not learn war anymore. Unfortunately, we're far from that prophetic ideal. So what is the connection? I think people can see the connection to hunger, to the environment, to treatment of animals, but to peace, not so sure. But here is an example. The Jewish sages saw that the Hebrew word lechem, which is bread, and milchama, for war, they come from the same root. And they deducted that when there's a shortage of grain and other resources, people are more likely to go to war. Another, just a reminder, we've indicated before that because of climate change, war is more likely because there's going to be tens of millions, perhaps a billion desperate, hungry refugees fleeing from climate change. So it makes more and more likely. So based on these teachings, I've been saying that the slogan of the peace movement and the slogan of the animal rights, vegan, vegetarian movement should be one and the same. From John Lennon, all we're saying is give peace a chance. Okay. And we need peace on earth. And here we have just symbolically peace on earth. So again, very important that shift toward plant-based diets, vegan diets, would reduce the threats of terrorism, violence in general, and war. So, to summarize, we've been talking about these 6 mandates, why it's so important that people become vegans, many, many reasons, but especially to help avert a climate catastrophe and help shift our imperiled planet onto a sustainable path. So we discussed the health issue, passion for animals, protecting the environment, serving natural resources, stop the waste of water and energy and land. We can reduce hunger and pursue peace. So we basically have a choice between a mainly vegan world and a destroyed world. For all the reasons we've been talking about, for example, the self-reinforcing positive feedback loops. So here's the vegan symbol, give peace a chance. And this is a little bit of a picture I have hanging right outside my apartment here in Israel. And you might say, well, we need a vegan diet, but it's just not going to happen. But hopefully it could happen if people realize how serious the threats are, that as the UN Secretary General said, it's a code red for humanity. And if they realize that the one thing we cannot answer, if they just say, I just love the taste too much, well, they can get that taste. We now have plant-based substitutes with the texture, appearance, and taste so close to the animal products, the meat and other animal products, that even long-time meat eaters can't tell the difference. And there's been a lot of progress in this. Vegan restaurants on the rise, and many, many substitutes, such that this vegan animal counts as anything you can eat, I can eat vegan. We have substitutes. For example, instead of dairy, milk from a cow, again, unnatural, meant for the baby cow, we have oat milk and soy milk and rice milk and almond milk and coconut milk, many substitutes. And again, there's plant-based substitutes for every animal product, from fish, chicken, meat, etc. So over here, trying to get the word out, very important to help move to a vegan diet. Is a veggie conference. Here's that fruit-based tie I was mentioning before. And there's just a summary, Juicy Report, a summary article by Vegan Activism, and saying my objective, as indicated in my book, Student Global Survival, Vegan Revolution, subtitle Saving Our World. This is what has to be done. And again, as I've come to the end here, this is the most important thing we can do. We have to avert a climate catastrophe if we want a decent world, a healthy world, environmentally sustainable world. So I hope you consider making a donation to Jewish Vets group on President Emeritus of, on the board of, or another vegetarian group, an animal rights group. But the most important thing you can do to help try to have as I said, a sustainable world for future generations. So Jewish Vets is doing very good things, really getting the word out. The website, they have, for example, a statement, a very positive statement about veganism signed by over 150 rabbis. And that number is growing. They're going to reveal that soon, along with their updated and much improved website. So I want to thank you for watching. Hope you found the presentation meaningful and worthwhile. And here's an important thing. If you have suggestions, want to help, please feel free to contact me, reggierich@gmail.com. And one important thing about that I showed you my book before, Vegan Revolution, Saving Our World with Revitalizing Judaism. I'd be happy to send PDFs of that, the cover of the book and the entire text. If you just email me at reggierich@gmail.com and just indicate that you'd like to get a complimentary free copy of my book. Suggestions are always welcome. And I hope you will use this information, help spread the word, contact me with suggestions. And again, I want to thank you very much and wish you all the best and tell you shalom from Israel.